Welcome back to Midday. We have the pleasure now of visiting with Lisa Trickett, Captain Lisa Trickett, who is with the Salvation Army. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
It's a real pleasure to get to sit down with you here in the Salvation Army and learn a little bit about your story. People often hear about the Salvation Army and, of course, the Bells of Hope, but sometimes we don't really know the origins of the stories that start here. Would you tell us a little bit just of your story and your journey?
Absolutely. One of the questions that a lot of time is asked me is, Lisa, how did you come to know the Salvation Army? And I said, oh, I love answering that question. When I was very young, I lived in a small town called Jackson's Point, but right on the Lake Simcoe, Ontario. And I really loved the boys. I loved running with them, I loved playing with them, but my favorite thing was climbing trees with them. And so I was in a tree one day with a bunch of boys and a bunch of girls, and along came a Salvation Army soldier. Her name was Miss Lewis, and she asked all of us children if any of us wanted to go to Sunday school. Wow. And I jumped out of the tree and I said, I do, I want to go.
I volunteer.
I volunteer. No, and so I brought her to my mom and introduced her, and my mom said, do you really want to go? And I said, yes. And so faithfully for 3 years, this lady picked me up faithfully, no matter what time of the year it was, what weather it was, she was faithful. And she picked me up, and she would take me to Sunday school. But something I really discovered, Katie, was what I was learning in Sunday school at the early age of 5, compared to what was happening in my home, was really eye-opening. And even for the simplicity of a child of 5 years old, it's amazing how we can truly recognize what is right and what is wrong.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that.
So every Sunday when I went to church, I was learning about the love of Jesus and how God loved the world so much that he gave us his son so that we would be reconnected with our great creator. And so as I went to Sunday school, I was comparing it what was going on at home. And I realized I didn't want what was going on at home anymore. I wanted what Jesus had for me. But that, unfortunately, did not really truly cover what was really going on behind the scenes. My father was a very unhealthy man. As gifted as he was as a blacksmith, my mother had to work really long hours, so she wasn't home very much. Very hardworking woman. My dad really abused me from the time I was 5 until I was 8. And so I experienced physical, mental, and sexual abuse by my father. And I didn't know the difference. I thought this is normal. I thought this was happening in everyone's homes. But the more that I went to Sunday school, the more I began to see the difference in different kinds of love. There is the unconditional love that God gives us, but then there's also the dysfunctional love that my father was sharing with me.
Okay, so putting those two things side by side, you were able to see this is not okay.
This is not okay. But I still was confused because I still felt that this was happening. And no one talked about it. It was always a secret.
Right.
And but eventually what ended up happening is I started acting out in school. I began to have really bad temper tantrums to the point where my poor teacher, between chairs and books and whatever I could get my hands on, were flying at her. And she kept ducking left, right, and center, and then I would get the ear going down to the principal's office.
Right, because sometimes we neglect the deeper issue, finding out if there's something else we need to solve there.
Yeah, and I got lots of consequences for my actions. But one day when the principal, he looked at me and he realized, you know, all these disciplines is not changing your behavior. And so one day he decided to pull out a can of Coke. He put it on the desk and he said, Lisa, what happened last night? And for the first time, someone really truly asked the right question. Right. And so I answered him, and from the time that I finished, he was crying, I was crying, because it was through his tears, it showed me that what was happening at home was not okay.
Right, and speaking it brings freedom to the situation as well.
Absolutely, freedom for sure. So what happened after that, I was taken to a foster care.
Okay. And did the Salvation Army remain in your life throughout that process and that change in your life as well?
What I loved about the Salvation Army is not only did they invite me back in, not only did they love me, they adopted me, but at the age of 13, they gave me a job because on Jackson's Point, we had a big, massive conference center and they needed waitresses. And so not only did I do the summer program, but I also did the weekends throughout the year and not only learned some tools and just learned how to have responsibility, but was also to have a really strong hold with the Salvation Army.
Okay, so for those who are wondering this season, even as they pass by the kettles and wonder, you know, where does my money go? What does it contribute to? Your story is one of how the Salvation Army can help a child.
Absolutely. I really believe not just the Salvation Army, but any church, we should be definitely tapping into children without homes. We should be tapping in with the widows. We should be taking care of anyone that needs help.
That is so important for people listening and wondering, am I alone in this? Can I talk about this? And we talked a little earlier about shame and how that holds us in those places, but the freedom comes in both the forgiveness and the discussion.
It does. The other thing, though, too, sometimes we struggle, and people don't want to talk about it, is the hidden feelings of depression, the abandonment, the brokenness, the anger, the frustration. We don't share, we don't seek help. And that's why it's so important, Katie, that we really go back to the beginning of who created us. God. Was this God's plan for our lives? Absolutely not. But because of man's brokenness and man's sinfulness, and I'm not just talking men, but women too, in their brokenness and sinful lives, we all make mistakes.
Yes. So for those who are seeking and hurting this Christmas, the Salvation Army is a place that they can come to find that home that you're talking about and that welcome that you're talking about.
And to meet you where you're at.
Yeah, just as you are.
Just as you are. And you know, Katie, I'm going to say something really strange. I am so happy. I'm not happy, actually, but I am thankful that the Lord allowed to happen to me as a child that happened so that I can be someone of hope, so that I can walk along with people and say it's going to be okay. Because God doesn't want to leave us in our brokenness. He wants to heal us. And if I never experienced that as a child, I would never be able to be effective for Him.
Wow. Thank you for bravely sharing your story and sharing the work that you do and being there for people who are hurting and broken as well. Thanks for joining us, Lisa.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back with more Midday in just a moment.